So I will be just going through a few general questions that have been asked. So first, and this has come in different formats, is what kind of support can EQA providers provide, for example, for training ward and community staff in terms of handling and reporting samples. And I have to say that there is no one general answer for this. I know in the past microbiology actually did provide sort of sessions where we went on sites and we helped with these things. But my advice is to contact your EQA provider with any specific requests that you might have. And then depending on the resources available, they will be able to assist you or give you sort of an idea of what they could provide. It could be online learning materials, and some of these will be covered later as well. Or indeed, like we used to do sometimes, like some sessions might be possible, but just reach out and a good communication with your particular providers is key. Then about assays, there were questions around specificity and sensitivity. And this is, from my point of view, very much as a microbiologist. So there was also questions around, are there any requirements for manufacturers when it comes to specificity and sensitivity for any products that they put out into the market? And to my knowledge, for example, in microbiology, there are no requirements that have been established. So in a sense, it is a free marker. So if you are introducing an assay, you really very much need to sort of like check the specs of any assay that you might wish to introduce. Specificity and sensitivity are two different things, and they do not, like one does not compensate for the other. So when it comes to specificity, and as I said, this is from my point of view as a microbiologist. Specificity means that your assay is specifically detecting a pathogen that it says it will detect. So, for example, if you have a flu assay with 95% specificity, that means that 1 in 20 of the positive results you get are actually probably not flu positive. They're positive for another virus or another pathogen. And again, there is no magic number for you guys to aim. It's just, what are the risks? So for this particular example, why are you using this assay? So what are the risks to the patient when that specificity is 95%? Are you using it to prescribe antivirals? So again, this is for every user to sort of think about, and all these technical specs need to work for your intended purpose. Sensitivity, it's the same thing. There's nothing to aim for. And again, it really depends on what you're using your assay for. And in microbiology, assays being too sensitive are not necessarily always a good thing, because pathogens can stay in the body for a really long time, which means that you can detect low levels of a pathogen in a sample, but it is not necessarily clinically relevant. And I also sort of want to say about what is meant by clinical relevance. It doesn't mean that it's a false positive. It doesn't mean that you won't see these patient samples, because you will. It just means that whatever you detect is probably not causing the symptoms that you are seeing. So again, you have to think of what you're using your assay for, and what are the risks to the patient if your assay is, say, 90% sensitive, 95% sensitive. So this is microbiology. But for example, in other fields, say for high sensitive cardiac troponin assay, high sensitivity becomes very, very important, because your assay needs to be able to detect even very low levels of a marker. So again, it depends on the field. It depends what you're using that assay for. There's no one answer fits all. And also very briefly, we've been asked about sort of middleware, if there's any middleware that could be used to report EQA results straight from the device to the EQA providers. And again, different centers, different EQA providers will have different approaches. They will have different technical possibilities for that. So the advice would be, again, to just contact the particular EQA provider and ask them that question. And then to sort of finish the general bit, we have gotten answers that sort of very much circle around what could we do for certain things to meet UCAS requirements, and it could be a number of things. And I have to say that as an EQA provider, obviously we are all UCAS accredited, so we're very much aware of the need to meet the standard. But perhaps a more helpful approach would be to put the patient front and center, and this is something that we as an EQA provider do try to do. What is the risk to the patient in any given situation? Because there are many things you could do to satisfy the requirements. There's never one answer fits all, again, because it depends on your, on your specific situation. But what could you do to minimize risk to the patient that would come from an incorrect test result? That might be sort of a question to ask instead. So, and the very last bit is sample type. So EQA samples, there have been questions around storage conditions, stability, how long can you use them for, all of that. So different EQA providers will have a variety of different EQA sample types. And all of these will come with their own quite specific instructions. They all have their own shelf life and storage conditions. So the important thing here is to remember that EQA samples always do come with instructions, with documentation. In some cases, this documentation might be physically present in the box with the samples. Storage instructions might be on the box. But in some cases, it might be that actually this material is online, provided by the EQA provider. So the important thing is to sort of familiarize yourself with exactly where to find any given information. Make sure you have easy access to it, make sure you know where to find it, and also to ensure that the end users of the EQA know exactly where to find, or people who receive the samples, they know where to find that information. Okay, so this concludes my very sort of whistle-stop tour of general topics.
Hello, good morning everyone. Well, it's fallen to me to try and cover the very vast topic of how you engage with your end users for the point of care. And this I'm really aiming at the point of care teams out there, because if we have got end users, people who are actually doing the test, you're already engaged if you're watching this webinar. So I'm really trying to help the POCT users to involve the end users as the people who are actually doing the test. So how do we do this? Well, firstly, I think we need to impress upon them that the point of care devices can and do go wrong. It is a rare event, but we do need to check them regularly. That's the point of EQA, IQC. And they probably don't realise that also we do this regularly for the lab analyzers. I think that some of the end users think that if they've got a machine, then it's completely foolproof. I think they don't maybe realise that there is opportunities for it to give inappropriate results. And then the EQA that we provide is to be used as a support tool to enable them to get accurate, reliable results that they can trust in. There's no point in having a lovely point of care device if you can't trust the result that it gives you. So you've got to have that faith in it, if you like, and the QC packages give you that reassurance. And of course, what we're all aiming for is to give the best possible patient care. And I like to say to people, if it was your nearest and dearest, your mother, brother, sister, whoever, you would want them to get the best care possible. So we want to make sure that the results that the machine delivers give you that confidence. And if there does happen to be a problem with a patient care has to be reviewed, then you will need to show that the EQA, the IQC, and the SOPs have been followed. And with that as well, you need to document everything. So whoever's done the IQC testing, whoever's done the EQA, when it was done, which test strips, the expiry, everything needs to be documented so that if you do have to do a review, you've got all the information there. So I like to remind people that knowledge is power, and this is a two-way street between the users, the end users, and your POC team. So the end users they already know how to use their device for patient testing, but they need to learn how to do the EQA, because sometimes it's quite different in a point of care situation doing an EQA sample to doing a patient, and it should form part of their competency. And they should be signed off for it. So everybody who's doing a point of care patient test should be able to do EQA and IQC, in my view. But the point of care team need to learn as well. They need to learn how the end user works, and this will be different depending on what test they're doing, so that they can help them to fit the EQA in around what they're doing. So it might be that they run clinics, or it might be an emergency situation. You've got to try and assist them to get time to do the EQA. And of course, both parties need to know when that EQA deadline is so that they can meet it, because there's no point in having time to do the test on a Monday when it closed the previous Friday. So instructions are important. We provide instructions with our material, and I'm going to cover that shortly. But if you, as a POC team, provide instructions, these are just a few things that I think would be important. So if the device is password protected, you need to know where to find that password. If it's got an operator lockout, you need to lead with that information high up in the instructions, because if somebody's not on the list of operators, then you don't want them starting to do the EQA and then finding that they can't get the machine to turn on and they can't progress with it. Otherwise, you've wasted that sample. So it's about laying things out in the right order. It needs to be user friendly. So remove all your laboratory jargon. You don't need to be telling people to calibrate the machine or reconstitute the sample. Just take it back to take out all the science jargon. I know it's difficult when we're all trained as BMSs and we like to use these terms, but that's one of the most important tips I would give, is to take out the jargon and just make it very brief and straightforward. Include photographs if you can, and also tell them what they do with the result, where they're going with it, if it's a website entry, and of course remind them of the deadline. And we at UK NEQAS BC always put closing date labels on our point of care, so even before you've opened the package, you know when the closing date is. So these are our instructions for our point of care INR machine testing samples. So this tells us that on the left hand side it's got your survey and it's got your closing date nice in bold in red, and it reminds them to please read the instructions. It's one of the biggest issues that we do have, that people skip the instructions. On the right hand side you can see these are how we lay ours out. It's photographs and very brief instructions, things in bold that's really important. And on the left hand page we've also got we signpost them to a video that they can watch. It's almost like they can test live with me. It's me in the video, and it's password protected, and it's stated in all the instructions where to go, how to get the password, so that they can watch the video if they've not done it for a year, if they're not familiar with it. Hopefully everybody will have done it who's actually testing, because they should have done it for their competency, but I like to think that if you picked it up, you could follow these instructions. So what would we do about users who don't manage to complete their EQA? And this is what we get told a lot. EQA is just another chore at the end of the time they've got to fit in. One of the things that I think we come across quite a lot is if there's more than one operator, everybody thinks it's someone else's job, and then nobody does it. So sometimes you need to try and designate a particular person to do it, although if everybody is trained, they should rotate it through so that everybody's getting a chance, but at least know who's going to do it in that survey and try and make sure that everybody's getting an opportunity. People like to give excuses for not doing EQA, and believe me, we've heard just about the lot. And I think it's probably because they're scared of it. They lack confidence in doing it. It's not something they do regularly, and it is quite different to patient testing. But unless they do it, unless they build that confidence, they're never going to get to that point where they feel comfortable. So you really need to support them through the short term, with the idea that long term they will be familiar and they will be able to do it. I would advise that you get them to test as soon as the sample arrives, because then if they have any testing issues, they require a repeat. Certainly for blood coagulation, we can usually get a repeat out. Not all the schemes will be able to, because shorter deadlines, sample might not be stable for as long as ours are. So that you'd need to check with each provider for that. If they've not completed and you get the report back, then go and visit them and try and find out why they didn't complete. Try and get to the bottom of it, root cause, and try and put things in place to try and get them to complete in future. But if they consistently don't manage to do the EQA, then you've really got to ask yourself whether they should be testing patients. Because if those devices and test strips are not getting EQA, then you shouldn't be using them on patients. And you've got to say, we're going to have to take this device away, or resite it, or retrain them. So should we share the report with the end users? We have been asked this. I would say yes, definitely to that. But the feedback we get is that they're not interested. And I think that's to do with the engagement. Once they start doing the testing themselves, then they're more engaged. If you can get them, print the report out, take it to them, pin it on the wall, say, oh, so-and-so did the test this time and they've passed. You can see they've got a green bar. Most of the knee classes use some kind of colour coding. Ours has got a very brief summary page on our reports, so you can see just at a glance that you've passed. Get it up on the notice board and let people know that it's been done. And I would say if you've got a large organisation, it might be worth considering having some kind of league table of completed results, so that you can almost say, well, SCBU have done it and ITU have done it, and try and encourage them that way. I wouldn't show each of them reports, but just to say that they've managed to complete, and try and get some kind of interest within the organisation. So what about if you get poor EQA results with the end user? Well, you really need to go and investigate. And the big question is it the device and the test strips, or is it the operator? And if you think it's the operator issue, firstly, were they competent? Have they got competency? And then you probably need to retrain them how to do the EQA, sit with them and watch what they do. Sometimes you can pick it up straight away that they're not quite following the instructions. They're maybe cutting corners on timing because they've got pressure on their time. So that's really the best way to try and find out where they're going wrong. And of course, from the blood coagulation point of view, we can usually supply repeat samples for this. And if you do have a repeat sample and retrain, you can compare to the report and then document that retrain in a document, hopefully that they passed when you compare it to the report. So I think that's the way forward with that. So which should be doing the testing? Who should be doing the testing? Is it the point of care team or the end user? Well, I would definitely say the end user, because they're the ones who are testing the patients. They know the machine, they know the device, and they really should just learn how to handle their EQA. And once they start engaging, then they can take ownership of it, and this should be easier. And once they start seeing that they're getting good results, then the actual stress and worry of doing the EQA test will ease. And then their excuses for not doing it should decrease. And it's sort of a circle of building up their confidence so that they're out on their own doing it. And hopefully they should be more interested in the report rather than just giving you a number to fill in and off you go. So I think it's working through it so that you build on that confidence. Yeah, so that was my brief roundup of how you might try and engage with the end user. It's also fallen to me to cover IQC frequency testing. This is a paper from the Norwegian EQA program about how to set frequency for internal quality control. And they've got this nice table in it on the right where you can work through. If you really don't know where to start, then this is a good point to work through and decide when you would test. And I've got some examples from our BC program. So in a nutshell, I would say that frequency needs to be enough to ensure you've got good quality results, but you don't want to be doing it so frequently that it's putting your test costs up. So you really need to consider, if you did have a fail with your IQC, how many tests or how many patients would you need to recall? So you're backtracking to the last time it passed. So this is, if we work through that, an example from the INR clinic, who perform 20 tests per day, 5 days a week. So that's 100 across the week. And they do their IQC each morning before clinic starts. So if on the Friday morning their IQC fails, they'll stop testing using the device because that's what the IQC is telling them. But then they need to look at the results since the last successful IQC, which was Thursday, and assess whether to recall them. And that's around 20. And I think that would be reasonable. I think this is a reasonable approach. And when I checked back with the table we just looked at, this fits in nicely with that. So this is a GP surgery who perform 10 tests per day once a week. And every 3 months they perform their IQC. So if their IQC fails, they would stop testing and relook at the test. When I calculated back, this would be about 120 patients. This is far too many to be considering what you would recall and what you would do. It's too big a time between and it's too many tests between. So for this centre, I would say at least maybe IQC weekly or at least every other week for their workload. And I think this just shows you that you've got to set it for your own workload. So there's not one size fits all, and there's not one size fits all per test. So different NEQASs might give you different advice on tests. This is really just, I was just talking about the INR test. So this is a questionnaire that we ran to INR testers, asking them their frequency of IQC. And you can see that the most common was when introducing a new batch of test strips, which is great. We would want them to do that. And again, monthly and weekly cropped up quite a lot, and with each clinic. But quite worrying was the 9% that stated they never did IQC. And when I checked into some of those centres, some were testing up to 100 a month, and that's really not acceptable. They should be doing IQC, however many they're testing. And testing big numbers like this, you should be doing it frequently. We do have some posters that Jen was going to pop into the chat box, which can explain the difference between IQC and EQA and information about them. So two posters. So one poster was aimed really at the POCT teams, and the other poster was aimed at the endpoint user. So the idea was that you could print them up and take them to the wards to really hammer home why we're doing EQA. And it really reverts back to my earlier talk, a little section about engaging with the user. Why are they doing it? What is it helping them with? So I'm going to hand over now to Rosie to cover the next section.
So I'm going to talk a bit about verification of point of care devices and where EQA comes into that, because a few of the questions that we've been asked throughout the other webinars have been about method verification. So we often get asked at all of our centres for previous distributions of EQA material in order to verify point of care devices. This is often what you do if you're verifying a method in your laboratory. And the participants who request this would often want a comparison with the lab results for the same test where applicable. So if you're verifying a point of care testing device, what we would generally advise you to do is follow a similar protocol to verifying a laboratory test, including a comparison with the laboratory results for the same test where this is applicable. If you have a lot of devices of the same type to verify, it might be useful to adopt a stratify where you fully verify a number of them, and then for the others, you have a briefer verification based on how the results compare to the existing devices, and this reduces the burden of verification, but ensures that you have at least done some work to check that the devices are fit for the purpose that you're using them for. EQA analysis is an important part of verification, and we often receive requests for previous distributions. However, the material that's provided across the different UK NEQAS centres varies. So some are going to be able to give you that and some are not. And the reason for this is that most of our centres do try to produce material that is as similar as possible to patient samples. And sometimes in such cases, so as an example, at Birmingham Quality for our clinical chemistry, point of care HbA1c and lipids EQA, we provide whole blood, and that's freshly prepared the day before dispatch. Therefore, the material does have a limited shelf life, so we can't provide past material. If you are looking for EQA material for the verification of a point of care testing device, the best thing to do is to contact the relevant UK NEQAS centre that provides a scheme for that test for further guidance on what is possible in terms of EQA specimens. If you're unable to get past specimens from that EQA centre due to the nature of the material, the best solution is to register the device in the relevant scheme, and then you'll receive material to analyse and a report of your results in real time. So just a little bit more about reports as well, specifically from Birmingham Quality. We did get asked a few questions about education and training material, so I just wanted to point out that Birmingham Quality have got material underneath our green education button, which participants can access from the results and reports page. If you click on the green education button, you'll be taken to the page shown on the site where the educational documents and media are displayed, and there is a point of care testing tab which has some training materials and there's a few webinars on point of care testing, and that's also where our main laboratory scheme training material is. We also have the scheme button, which is relevant to the particular scheme that the participant may be in. This is sort of the blue button that's got the name of the scheme on it, and if you click on that, there are often useful documents relating to that scheme. So with the point of care testing schemes, we've got user guides for how to analyse our specimens, how to report results, and how to view your report. So that may be useful to some of your participants if they don't already know that that exists. A specific question was asked about Birmingham Quality's HbA1c EQA schemes. So we do have a laboratory-based EQA scheme, which is the UK NEQAS for glycated haemoglobins. And we do have some point of care testing devices and participants within that scheme, and they will receive a report that looks like our standard laboratory EQA reports. However, we do also offer monthly and bi-monthly point of care testing specific HbA1c participation, which has a simplified report that you receive 2 specimens, either monthly or bi-monthly, rather than the 3 that you would receive in the main laboratory scheme. And this is it's a choice of the point of care team and all the participants as to which of those schemes they would prefer to join. What I would say is that if they join the laboratory-based scheme, they would get a lot of information about different methods. Whereas if you were to join the point of care testing scheme, you would only see information relating to your own method. And just because another question we were specifically asked was whether NICE recommended diagnosing diabetes, type 2 diabetes by using point of care HbA1c tests. Just wanted to say a little bit about that. So NICE and the World Health Organization, who have a guideline around the use of HbA1c for diagnosis of diabetes, don't specifically advise on what method to measure HbA1c you should be using in the diagnosis of diabetes, other than advising that that method is calibrated according to IFCC standardization. It really does depend on how good your specific method or instrument is, and it's not simply a case of laboratory methods versus point of care testing. Not all methods are created equal. Not all point of care tests for HbA1c are good enough for this, but some may be. The instructions for use for your device will detail whether the device has been actually CE marked for use in the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, and if it's been CE marked for monitoring. Some devices may be CE marked for both, and others may just be CE marked for monitoring, so do have a very careful look at that. But even in those cases, it still doesn't mean that that device is good enough for the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. There are also implications when using some point of care testing HbA1c devices for patients who have haemoglobin variants. And if their samples are sent to the laboratory, the haemoglobin variants may actually be picked up using ion exchange methods.
Looking at the questions that were asked that were actually outstanding, mainly from the first session, is quite it is very evident that our users, and especially those in EQA, in point of care testing rather, are looking to their EQA providers to actually support and assist with the whole process of the provision of services. And I think this is something that hopefully we can maintain. And it would be very useful to know, to get any comments back from, anybody in the audience today as to whether they are very, what their opinion is on this this sort of pan-disciplinary POCT approach to supporting the POCTs through education using the EQA service. This series of webinars has been extremely popular. We've had a large number of attendees, and we had a lot of interest in this when we were on the stand at the IBMS Congress, and I think it indicates a need for knowledge in this area. We do have a couple of extra questions. They've both come from Iftikhar Ali. Thank you. If anybody else does have any questions, please do post them. The first one, which I think will bring a smile to a lot of people's faces, is how do you actually get staff to read the instructions? Now, I don't know, I think, Marit, this really came up in your area, and maybe anybody else on the panel here would like to chip in to try and answer that question. Marit.
Yes. So I think it all comes back to engagement. And of course, you have to take into consideration that the end users can be a very diverse group of people. And if you're coming from a laboratory background, you sort of have to park some of your knowledge, I think, sometimes. And it might be something as simple as, not maybe talking to them in terms of EQA and IQC and all these quality terms that we're so used to, but maybe just asking, how do you know that this device is giving the correct result for your patient? And maybe starting from that point of view, which is really, really very simple, to try to get them more engaged. And then leading from there, if this result is not correct, what is the risk to the patient? And sort of maybe try to get them to engage on that very, very initial level before trying to take it any further. I think Diane said to avoid jargon, sort of like really sort of, a very clear and don't assume almost don't assume any knowledge. Just get them engaged, try to build up the confidence, maybe try to see it from their point of view as well, and always ask, what information would you need? What support would you need to sort of to be more engaged, to have more knowledge? I mean, it is such a difficult question to answer, but I think, Diane, you might want to say something on this topic as well.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with you, Marit, that to remove the science jargon, but also certainly from our instructions that we provide, keep it brief, tell them exactly what they need, but don't give them more information than they need. And what we've found helpful is to highlight certain words that we really want them to focus on. So for our INR, for example, you make the sample up and then you let it sit for 2 minutes. So the 2 minutes is highlighted in bold so that it jumps out. So that if they've done it before, they can just really just look and scan and pick up the important bits. And if they're new to it, they can read it all carefully. And as we've all said previously at meetings, we really struggle with people reading instructions, and then others will get in touch and say you've got the apostrophe in the wrong place because they read everything in great detail. And that just goes back to the fact that there's such a vast scope of people and abilities that do point of care. So I think, and again, it's about engaging, and the more often they do the testing, the more used to it they get, and then they can just really scan the instructions if you like. I would suggest that. So really just brief, no jargon, anything that you really want them to do in bold.
I mean, I think there is always an issue in that the samples that are distributed for EQA are often in a different format a different from the sort of finger that many people are used to dealing with in point of care testing, because in many cases they will just be finger stick samples, whereas it is impossible for us to send those round, so we have to send round something that is in a tube. I just wondered how much use you felt that having pictures or pictorial steps in instruction sheets could be. I know from haematology one of the biggest problems is encouraging people or instructing people to actually mix the samples before they analyse them, because they're not used to having to do that. So they will maybe give them a little mix and then leave them on the side for 5 minutes, and of course we'll get an incorrect answer. But I just wondered if anybody is using or would consider that pictorial instructions could help.
Yeah,
I
I was gonna say
think
that's definitely something I would have suggested. Because even 1 minute short videos could be helpful as well. I think something that makes it more visual, especially with people who are using devices who are non-lab based, our training is going to be a part of this. So, doing this is every day to us. However, when somebody's coming from a different background, it isn't. So it's about kind of helping them to understand that EQA is part of patient safety and giving them really quick, especially because they're busy and they're trying to run quite quickly, giving them really quick guides. So 1 minute short videos, pictorials, even little charts that can be positioned by the machine could be really helpful for them to kind of see quite quickly how to run these samples on the machine.
Does anybody else want to add anything else to that answer?
Maybe from a slightly different angle, but because our centre is hosted by UK HSA, one thing that they always take into consideration when they give out public health guidance, and this is a little bit different, is also that there might be sort of barriers to people understanding written instructions and very scientific terms. So also I think any sort of images, pictorial instructions would be helpful with that, if that might be another concern that you're having as well, that maybe some words are used that people just don't quite maybe understand.
Yeah, and I mean, interestingly, the attendee who asked this question, which is Iftikhar Ali, has also said that pictorials often get ignored as well, and what often happens is they just ask a colleague. So I think we need to bear that in mind. I will then go on to the next question, which is again from Iftikhar, who says point of care testing services often do not have the management authority of the end user, and how can we designate a person to do that, take that oversight? I don't know who would like to answer that. Di, I mean, you've got an enormous experience in POCT, in blood coag. Have you got anything you would like to say on that?
I think if the end users is just one person, one nurse somewhere who does the testing, that's fine. The problem arises when it's 4 or 5 or 6 users that they all think somebody else is going to do it. I think the best approach would be to contact them when the sample arrives and say, right, who you've got available, who of your team member is going to do this survey, are they competent, and almost do it as each survey arrives. There's no point in trying to set it at the beginning of the year or months in advance, because people move on. Somebody might be off on long-term sick, but I would suggest that once you've got that sample, you then go and find out and say, right, who's here, who's competent, who's going to take this on, and then just make sure that it rotates through the group, because you kind of don't want an expert person and not give anybody else the chance. And then if they leave, then you're stuck because you've got nobody willing to do it. So I think you do need to try and rotate it through. And once you get the report back, you could even handwrite on who's done that one and stick it on the notice board. And then next time you can say, well, you did the last one, so try and get somebody else to do it. But bearing in mind that people are on holiday or off sick or whatever, so it needs to be sort of when that sample's arriving, how you go and sort that out. Whether that's by email or in person, it depends on how big a POCT team you've got and how many people you're looking after.
Yeah, anybody else got any other comments they would like to make on, how we actually, how can we designate a person to have authority over the point of care testing, or to even to do the point of care testing on particular days? Obviously, there is a role for a POCT coordinator, but there are a lot of samples coming in and going out.
I mean, in an ideal world, everybody who does patient testing should also be able to do EQA. So the question might also be, do you have to have one person, or should it really be that any one of the end users are capable of doing that task?
That interestingly leads on to another question, again from the same attendee, who has said that there are a lot of end users and very few point of care testing staff, which is clearly true. And how can we introduce a culture that can propagate, that can be propagated amongst all the end users, which comes down a little bit to the engagement. Don't know if any, again, it comes down to yourself, Diane, Yvonne already picked up the topic of the engagement.
I think if you are in an organisation that's got, I don't know, 20 sites with lots of different end users, that you could run some lunchtime sessions where you get them all together and start a user group, if you like, within your department, within your organisation, and do some bits of training like that, so that you're training them en masse, makes it better on the time that you're inputting. And also, if they're doing the same sort of test, it gives them backup so they can ask each other as well. I know that Ithaca mentions that they do ask a colleague, which is good if you're asking the right colleague who's knowledgeable, and not so good if you're asking somebody who doesn't really know and just decides to make something up on the spot. And Ithaca's also said that staff sometimes get creative, don't bother with instructions and just get creative. Yes. I think if that's the case, then you print the report out and you take it to them and you say, what went wrong? Did you follow the instructions? Your results not good? Who did this testing? Did you just make something up? And then you get to the bottom of that, and that reinforces that if they do get creative with instructions, it's not a good idea. So it's all the teaching exercise, if you like, till you get them to do what you want, when you want, following the instructions, and then they get a good result, and then everybody's happy.
Thank you, Di. There's another question here. Questions are actually popping in there. Question from Terry Robinson, who said that their end users like the reports emailed to them, and they have users set up to input their own results on another scheme provider, that another provider of POCT EQA. Is this something that UK NetQuest does? There are security issues around emailing reports. I know it's something that does happen in cases, but it is slightly better really to have people actually log in and retrieve their reports. But I don't know what any other scheme providers, any other POCT EQA providers on the panel here have in terms of practice for entering results and recovering reports.
I would prefer the end user, the person who's used to doing the test, input the results. Yes. Rather than write it on a bit of paper and pass it to the POCT team, because that's when you get transcription errors. They can't quite read it. So the person who does the test should input them. And on our system, everybody gets a personal login, so they can log in, and then they can log in, look at the report and download it themselves. There's no need to go through the point of care team for that.
Rosie, you had a comment on that as well.
Yeah, within Birmingham quality schemes, we use a hub and spoke model. So all of the individual sites that have a device will have a login and a username and a password for each individual device. But the hub coordinator will have oversight over all of those devices. So they can log in and they can see who's submitted their results. They can look at the reports for all of the devices within their hub, and they can sort of help to get the end user engaged. But if they're struggling to log on, the hub coordinator generally has all of that login information as well. So they can help their participants in terms of actually reviewing reports and submitting results. We have had the odd thing posted back to us because the participant hasn't, well, the person who had the login has left and they've not passed it on to anyone else. So yeah, it is difficult sometimes, but we prefer the end user to enter their own reports as well.
Just looking, Michael Thomas has put a comment in here about POCT is now being incorporated into the new ISO 15189 standard, but there is often a disconnect between lab and hospital management and end users, especially in diverse networks. how would we encourage that engagement? And I think he's also suggested that, you know, perhaps find an approach to the risk management lead for the organisation, or are there any other opportunities? I don't know who would like to take anything on that. Engagement again there's obviously engagement is a very high priority here. So I'm coming back to sort of Diane, Yvonne, but Rosie, I don't know if you have any views either.
Nothing further than what we've already discussed, I think, Barbara.
Yes.
I mean, we've discussed it quite at length, and it is a big issue getting the end users involved there. I think maybe the biggest issue is giving them time to do EQA and IQC. A lot of them are so pressed for time that the comment comes back, we haven't got time to fit this in. And if it's a clinic situation, if they book out a 10-minute slot, however long they give for a patient, if they book out a patient slot to do their IQC or EQA, maybe that's an option.
Yeah.
But I think timing is a problem.
Yeah.
Or it's an excuse, maybe. Either or.
It is a difficult one to answer, because you are talking about people who all have other priorities as well. And EQA, we have seen from experience, tends to be one of the things that doesn't become a priority. You know, it feels like, oh, you know, I have to run this sample. I've got other things to do. You know, it goes back to the educational and training part that's been talked about. But I think it's also about the whole how can you get creative in this engagement as well. Part of those is, it's been suggested, having champions. I think if you have these point of contacts that you can get together and asking them, because it's highlighting actually the constraints and the needs for the importance of EQA, and asking them what would help work for them in terms of how can we work this together, maybe also something that you could do, see, because one of the things you find is when you're enforcing something onto people, they're going, this doesn't work for me, and they're not engaging with it. But if you can find a system that works for everybody, and so they have input into this, that you find that they might have more buy-in, because they've had forgotten the term now, you know, they've had time to kind of engage and take ownership of this as well. So then it's likely to have more engagement if they can have some ownership on how they're doing this as well.
I think the issue that if it's really not working, that obviously the risk management approach is a very valid one, because that is what is required under ISO 15189, is to assess the risk of the service that you're providing or your decision making. So I do think, Michael, it probably is a very good approach. We have a few minutes left for last couple of questions. Maddie Smith has asked whether we have any advice on how to approach end users that may have concerns over handling EQA samples that are not the same sample type as patient samples. For example, the ones that have to be reconstituted before analysis, which may be, obviously, that people are concerned about introducing errors due to the pre-analytics of that, and also then handling the samples after. But I don't know, Marit, you really dealt with the sample types and anything there. Have you got any thoughts on that?
We all understand this concern. We've sort of talked about it, that, you know, the EQA sample does not look like a patient sample, and that might put people off, because, you know, they feel like, well, how is this the same? But there is always value in doing EQA, and I think it is important to get the end users to understand that, no, it's not exactly the same, that it does not look the same, but why are you doing that EQA? And I think once there is an understanding of, you know, why this is still important, even though there are these caveats, it might be a little bit easier to get them to sort of follow the instructions when they see the benefit, when they understand why this is still necessary. I mean, that's just my my point of view. I don't know if anybody else wants to add.
I think it just goes back to training and competency. If you show them how to deal with the samples and they're trained and then they get comfortable with them, the samples are generally not that difficult to deal with. And we can show them that they've been, certainly ours have virology testing on them. So we state that in all our paperwork so that we can show that they're safe. So back to training in the first place with them so that they are comfortable with them.
Yeah, I mean, you can always have a bit of hesitancy if something is new, but once you become familiarized with it, it should not, I mean, nobody, I think, sends out samples that are exceedingly complicated to reconstitute.
Thank you. We've got just 2 last questions, which will be really nice to try and finish in our last 2 minutes. Terry Robinson has asked, in terms, I think this relates to the questions about emailing reports and having direct input. She's asked if this is the same for all UK NetQuest, as it doesn't seem to be so for respiratory viruses. Marek, coming back to yourself from microbiology.
Yeah, I have to say I don't quite understand what is meant here, but I'm sort of speculating it might be about the hub and spokes model, perhaps. So hub and spokes model is something that we can apply to all of our schemes. It really depends how, because we do get sort of like networks joining, many sites. So it really is sort of a conversation between our operations team and how they prefer to do this. So this is something, and I'm presuming this is what it's about. It is something we can do, but just if Terry would maybe send us an email, then we can pick this up in greater detail.
Directly. No, that will be fine. So, and anybody that has any further questions obviously can follow up. Just one very, very last question from Helen Berry, who has asked about, does anybody have end users running blood gas POCT EQA samples? The samples are very complicated. Rosie, I think this falls within the remit of clinical chemistry in terms of blood gases, but I'm not sure, that may not be a UK NetQuest programme.
It's not something that we offer within UK NetQuest at the moment, so I'm not able to advise on that one, unfortunately.
So I think they would have to go back to the individual provider. So thank you. And I think, and there's a few more people that have popped responses to that in, but I'm afraid we're really out of time here today, and my thanks go to all of our speakers. So thanks to Marek Orav, thanks to Diane Kitchen, thanks to Yvonne Hector, and thanks to Rosie Forster. Thanks also to our central office for organising the webinar today.